So this session is about working together across borders and exploring the potential of working together. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll launch as soon as possible into the questions. We have in recent years seen a resurgence of conflict, I think, around the world, and there's against a backdrop of a fracturing of the multilateral space. This has made it very difficult for organizations like the UN to play a leading role in finding global security solutions. We also see an emergence of new actors, especially in Africa. I'm mostly focused on Africa, so sorry, my questions will be mostly about Africa. And so against this difficulty of finding global or African security solutions, we see an emergence of new actors who also play a role on the global stage. For example, the UAE or Turkey and Saudi Arabia have all now are part of this global world where we all try to find solutions. I would like to start with Madam President. This search for global security solutions has become very difficult, and wars are on the increase, or we have the impression that there's more conflicts recently, and they're very hard to resolve, as we can see from various conflicts today. What is your experience with conflict resolution and the fracturing of the multilateral space? How do you see that? Can we talk about a fracturing of multilateral space?
Let's put the whole idea about global cooperation, effectiveness in development, effectiveness in security, into a historical context. Post-World War II, 4 major institutions, global institutions, were organized to promote development and security. The Bretton Woods institutions, International Monetary Fund and World Bank, to ensure economic growth. The Security Council, to ensure peace and security in the world. The United Nations through the General Assembly, to ensure solidarity and collective action with a common purpose. But over the years, there's been an evolution in such a way that in Africa, for example, we had gone through the processes of liberation, of big man syndrome, militarism, and we've also, over the years, developed adherence to democratic principles. On the other side, the other regions, we saw effective multilateralism that was applied largely through bilateral relationships and multilateralism through, again, the 2 primary global financial institutions, World Bank and IMF. The changes that occur in evolution is that a fragmentation of the global leadership led to issues in which the effective commitment to democracy and was undermined, and that also had its effect in Africa, as we've seen 8 coups d'etats within the past decade or so. I think we're at the place in the world where COVID-19 and the effect of COVID-19 has changed the thinking and brought to fore a commitment to a new global agenda, a global agenda that goes past the multilateral development goal, sustainable development goal, to the point today where we're talking about more effective multilateralism and a more secured world through a changed peace and security, through changed global financial architecture, through addressing matters relating to global public goods, such as the threats of climate change, artificial intelligence, ensuring that the Security Council are changed. So we're just in a changing world in which Africa also has to find its voice through our own regional institution, through the Africa Free Trade Agreement, and through ensuring that we have, through our regional institutions, whether there's the multilateral banks, or whether it's our regional political institutions coming out of the African Union, that we are able to have a voice in this new evolution of a world that's going to be changed in significant ways. So let me say that I think much has been said today from the panels that preceded ours, and what they have tabled are just another example of the way the world is changing and the responses that are required if Africa is to maintain a place being what we call the continent of the future. So you can pass on to somebody else.
Thank you. Ambassador Mpungwe, you've been instrumental in negotiations across the continent, notably in Rwanda, and I think locally in Tanzania as well, in the mining sector. You have a lot of experience, and your country is also involved in a stabilization mission right now in the neighboring country, Mozambique. You have a lot of experience with mediating and negotiating. However, today, I think globally, it's very difficult to find effective mediators who are accepted by all the parties in conflict. What is your experience with mediation, and what does it take to be a good negotiator or mediator?
Thank you. I think, first of all, I want to state that there have been a number of conflicts in Africa, and there continue to be some. But to a great extent, we are able to resolve, to deal and resolve our own conflicts. To the extent that the factors were the African factors. And we had no shortage of those sources of conflict because, as you would appreciate, most of the colonial borders that we inherited in Africa were very arbitral. They never made any ethnic or tribal or economic or geographical sense. So the colonial borders by themselves, the way the countries were formed in Africa was conflictful. You find different tribes crossing different borders. And then we ended up with the vagaries of the Cold War, which also caused a lot of tensions in Africa. And if you could recall, there were a lot of coups and violent changes in a number of countries in Africa. But we still were able to develop our own internal capacity to resolve some of these conflicts, especially in this part of Africa, the Southern Africa, and through the frontline states. We were able to, to support various liberation processes, but also resolving a number of conflicts. And as you mentioned personally, I was very much involved, apart from the frontline states' activities to bring liberation and independence in a number of countries around here. But I was specifically involved with the mediation of the Rwandese conflict in 1992-93. And indeed, we were able to, it was a difficult conflict, you know, it's a deep-rooted conflict, characterized by very emotional issues, but we in Tanzania, you know, assisted by neighboring countries, but with the very active involvement of the continental organization, the OAU, then now AU, we were able to pull through a peace agreement, but as the global peacemaking procedures and architecture it is, we also had expected, and it was organized in such a way the UN would have come in to implement the peace agreement that we achieved in Arusha during the 13 months that we negotiated the peace deal. But it was a lack of, you know, timeless response on the part of the UN. The peace process collapsed at the cost of 1 million people, which is the saddest part of my experience in dealing with the conflicts in Africa.
But so what, according to you, takes a good mediator? What's essential for a good mediator in conflict?
I think it depends on, you know, you have to understand the character and nature of the conflict. It's not one size fits all. In the case of my experience with the Rwandese conflict, it is a deep-rooted conflict. And we had to develop a different model for it. You know, at that time, the common model in Africa, whenever a crisis happens, you know, the heads of state would fly in at a certain country, you know, sit there for a few hours, discuss, and come with resolutions, and they fly back. But in the case of Rwandese conflict, which we classified as deep-rooted conflict, we changed the model. We had to reserve heads of state and foreign ministers and prime ministers, use them as lever for change. Whenever we got stuck, we would go to the foreign ministers or to the prime ministers or to the president. But what we did, we established camp, so to speak. We all were in Arusha, and we would negotiate different phases. There was a lot of groundwork that we did. I had a team of seven assistants to assist, but also other institutions like the Ministry of Defense, our intelligence department, our home affairs, and others who also came to assist us. So, but we were there in Arusha permanently for about 13 months. So we only referred to the foreign ministers or to the presidents when we got stuck. We were using them as a four-wheel drive, so to speak. So if it's not difficult enough, we refer to the foreign ministers, but if it is difficult, you go to the higher authorities.
So mediation requires commitment, and it's a long-haul process.
And you wanted to know, you know, there are so many people in Africa who have been involved, but I think people occupy situations and move on. When I did that, I was in the diplomatic service. I'm no longer there. Maybe my records are not available in that sense. But a number of people in Africa who have been involved in resolving different conflicts, I think it is important for whatever structures that we have, keep an inventory of those talents or those skills and apply them whenever they're needed.
I have so many more questions for both of you, but I'm going to turn now to Ms. Gasarabwe, who spent a lot of time in Mali as a deputy, sorry, it's a very long title, Deputy Special Representative of the MINUSMA, which I'm not going to spell out, the peacekeeping mission, stabilization mission in Mali. And in some way, the stabilization mission was a success in the sense, I think, that a lot of countries pulled together to contribute to the success of the mission. Countries both from the north, the west, the south, and the east. However, the mission is now almost done withdrawing, and we see a resurgence of war. What do you think comes next? What should be the next step, especially for countries who face a asymmetric conflict in the sense, of terrorism, or we should say maybe jihadism, which are different conflicts than the conventional kind of warfare that the UN initially addressed?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me give a special tribute to this distinguished tribune we have here. President Ellen Sirleaf was involved very much. We're together in New York, and he was the head of Africa Bureau. Ambassador, you heard about the negotiation he did in Rwanda, and I'm Rwandese. So I know exactly 94 happened when I was in New York under President Sirleaf's leadership before she became president. So we went through a crisis. And after this crisis, we had other crises. So we're dealing with the crisis in Africa. 94, 96, it was a terrible one. Rwanda, Congo, then Central African Republic, the mutiny, and so on. And later on, you see, we're in 94, we're talking 94, and now we're in 2023. We still have some conflict in Africa, unsolved and other solved. And I think there's a lot of lessons learned for people who want really to see what happened when there's a crisis and when the crisis happened, and to go back, the history and the whole geographical dimension. Why we have a cross-border disease problem? Why we have a Sahel region now? We're going to go to Mali. But I just want to say that each country cannot say, I'm stable, and they're going to continue to be stable. Because I was in Mali as the resident coordinator, the head of UN, in 2011. It was a stable country. Mali was given us one of the good governance example in West Africa. And I think they start managing the crisis, even though there was a north-south separation. But then I was appointed as Assistant Secretary General for Global Security. When I came to New York, I started looking at the report coming from Mali. There's a crisis coming up. There's a terrorist coming up. And who have followed the Mali situation has seen also the whole collapse of Libya and the whole management of African Union who tried to really tamper the crisis in Mali when we have like the Liberian movement. But there was definitely, the North-South had the problem, but it was not such a big issue. They were trying to solve it. And suddenly, 2013, my goodness, the whole collapse, terrorist group occupying the North, and starting talking about peacekeeping mission. Who can say that Mali at that time, the good governance, quote to quote, was coming a peacekeeping mission, or the forces coming, and who knows the arrival of the peacekeeping mission knows also how the peacekeeping are governed. We're talking about African Union, we're talking about the dynamic of regional dimension, we're talking about the people who understand the region and can dialogue. But when it comes to the peacekeeping, we're ruled by the Security Council, taking resolution. And sometimes the mission work towards the reporting to the Security Council and take the resolution again for the mission. We thought there was a small conflict when stabilization, meaning that the ports can come, and we have to take also the approach of a multidimensional approach. When we have to deal with the crisis, you have the humanitarian, people are displaced. You have to deal with the humanitarian dimension. You have to deal with the development, because when people also don't have water, energy, whatever, you have to deal with that, so development dimension. You have to deal also with the people who have been killed probably by the armed forces, and the justice and the reconciliation and all these kind of things. So it became like a dimensional approach. But then who knows very well, the UN knows that there's a secretary of a Security Council, and there is the agencies and the humanitarian trying to act. But the voice of reporting is the Security Council. And then there is an approach of saying, who's going to dialogue and make sure that those forces, the terrorist group are there? What will happen? And I'm coming back to this session talking the innovative approach. Don't think about the expert, the mission is going to solve the problem. In my view, it's the people inside. They've lived together for many years. Look at Mali, how it was a fantastic country for centuries and so on. But what happened when you started dividing the north, the center, the south, and people believing that they're antagonists? And I think that's where we have to rethink the stability. The stability, you can have forces, defense. And we have, by the way, from one national forces to 34 contingents coming from Cambodia, coming from Bangladesh, coming from wherever. And you think that the people will understand the dynamic inside? Yes, it's our responsibility that they have the mission, but we have such a big dynamic. And I think the rethinking stability, as you said, is to go back again to the population we serve. What is happening there? Are the national forces, security, working with the population? Are the population looking at them as the people they can trust? We had a case just on the cross-border on Mauritania, because the Sahel region is so interconnected. And you know, when we ask them why these terrorists also can move around, and there's a trafficking, there's a lot of, how do you make your region stable? They say, listen, we had a system on security. When there is a small radio and small telephone, we distribute it to all local entities, and whenever, and we sensitize the population. Security is your security, but it's you who have to take the lead. When someone comes to the region, the local one, the chief, the imam, and the people, mosque on Friday, they have, and they were talking about your own security, grassroots level, women, youth, security involved. If you see someone coming, the Sahel region is like, you see who's coming, and from far, and someone say, I see someone I don't know. Could you just see what's happening? So you have like the trust between the security forces and the population. Population is really new. Second, is also those population, when they see that they completely don't have anything to eat, anything, you don't care about them. Of course, when these forces came, they tried to be the nice guy, the humanitarian savior. And of course, they recruited the local entities, especially the youth, and they became part of the terrorists. So I think one of the aspects I liked very much during the negotiation was to say, why don't we bring together, while the government is looking at the SSR, security sector reform, but let's look at the entities, the local entities, and look at how we can build this trust and have the civilian and the forces together with a dialogue, and see how also we have the regional entities, including the head of state, including all the dynamic, to come and help. And at the same time, that's why I said this multidimensional approach, you also serving the local communities to provide the basic needs. And I do think that I clearly want to come back to this rethinking stability. I was approached by, I think, Atlantic Council and the CIPRI, those two think tanks, rethinking stability in the peacekeeping mission today. I think if we are ignoring that dynamic of local entities, that dynamic of the negotiator, the peace builder, we are totally out. And I think that's where we deal with maybe reforming the Security Council is understanding, even though you have a report, but think what are really you building on the ground. I think that's very, very important. And I was just discussing yesterday with a fantastic youth group dynamic here, building what they call the tree. I don't know if they're here, but really I want to give the credit. It's like how each person from Sahel region was trying to see the youth movement, the women movement, and I give also the credit to the women in the Mano River, how they also stabilized the region. So I see that when we have like lesson learned from the previous crisis, like I was in Guinea also before Mali, when there was a Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea in crisis. But the region is stabilized. So it's also so to see where are we today with Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. And very ironically, is the army groups. The head of states these days are from military system. Something has to be looked at. But at the same time, I was very surprised last time to hear that one region called Kidal, which is very close to Algeria, the south of Algeria, was supposed to be the terrorist hub. Nobody can go there. The army from Mali cannot go there. But we just heard recently that they managed to go there. So something is being built probably on negotiation of local entities, on a national level, and the region are getting probably stabilized. Let's see, hope that probably there will be a lead to from our military group, military leadership to the civilian, but together building a nation which can be again stable.
Let's talk a little bit about the African leadership experience. You had asked me to talk about Liberia. Liberia experience is a very clear example of how African leaders had come together in collective action. Liberia had the largest peacekeeping force, and it's only because the leaders of ECOWAS, the leaders of the West African nations, were able to come together and put in soldiers that were supported by the United Nations through the peacekeeping force, but they were the ones that led the action that were able to bring out 2 decades of civil war to an end. We also, as was mentioned by her, the Ebola experience about effective collective cross-border action, in which the African leaders, through the African Union summit meeting, decided that they were going to support the young people of Africa to come in partnership with the young people in the 3 affected countries, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Cote d'Ivoire, to be able to bring the Ebola tragedy to an end. And through that means also the 3 affected countries being able to organize joint security measures, joint communication methods, were then able to work together and to be able to end the Ebola in the shortest period of time. Liberia being most affected, but the one that ended it first, before the other 2, even though in each country, in our country, over 5,000 people had died. And I think if you all recall COVID-19 and that experience, it was the African leadership that put together the first means of being able to mobilize the resources for vaccines that would be able to be taken to our country. And they organized a panel for being able to get from Africa's corporate leaders to be able to provide those resources much before we were able to get the responses from the West, and to start the process of being able to have manufacturing units in Africa so that Africa could have its vaccines. But with all of that, we still were not able to get vaccines because of the infrastructure constraints. This is why the experience of beginning to look today at global action and to introduce the changes in global action that are going to lead it. Today we have what in effect are global wars, Ukraine, Palestine, and Israel. And we've not been able to get the Security Council to take the necessary action through dialogue, through measures. This is why we're to be able to get a new world order in peace and security, you have to have the participation of regional institutions. You need to find the measures whereby there's more prevention than there is cure when it comes to conflict. And this call for a new global order is something in which Africa has to play and is playing a leading role. We cannot continue to have a world in which the domination is by the few powers, in which the people themselves who will be affected by decisions and policies that are formulated somewhere do not have a say, do not have a place. We cannot continue to have a world that cannot address those that have been marginalized, whether we're dealing with women or whether we're dealing with youth. This is why the call today for effective peace and security is to ensure that the Security Council has representation from other regions. And fortunately, a decision has been taken to make sure that African Union has a seat on the Security Council. We cannot have a world order in which the resources of the world are held by only the institutions of the global north and the global south excluded. You cannot have SDR allocation, which provides the financial resources for development, has to be held by the major richer countries of the world. And when there's a threat like COVID-19, we do not have the means to have equitable and scaled resources for the poorer countries. That's why we need to change the overall global financial architecture. Today, where does capital resources lie? Where is the money in the world? It's held by the private sector. It's held by private corporations. And again, a new financial architecture is going to ensure that there's a blending of resources. That is what is called the Bridgetown Initiative, in which that blending of resources that come through bilateral arrangements, multilateral arrangements, are then twinned with private sector, private capital, that will be at a scale where countries can develop more, where you do not have the ownership of these institutions controlled by the global north, so that the global south too has representation in each of those institutions. And so if I talk about this, is because today this is essentially the agenda of the world. The time for change has come, and these changes have to take place where people are going to be able to be a part of those processes. The fragmentation that we have today in the global political order needs to change. It's changed because the dominating powers have been weakened over time by the growth of other institutions that have been able to do more in terms of having strong economic growth, being able to promote their own prosperity, but not today being able to have a voice. And so if I stray from the topic of just trying to promote effective transboundary thing and talk about wanting to do with global issues, is because the time has come for that. The time to be able to change the structure of the world has come. That's because the threat of the world, look at COVID-19. Nobody would have thought when it started that it would have so penetrated the entire world. The major countries did not react until it became a global threat. And this is why today we have the effort is made to create the vaccines, to create the preventive things in the health sector to be able to respond to that. So if I'm taking too much of their time because of these things, it's simply because we've reached that stage in the world where we have to now, Africa is moving toward finding its role as the continent of the future, finding its role through collective action, through more effective regionalization and regional integration, to find that common voice, to be able to take its rightful place in the discussion, in the discourse of nations about what the global agenda should be, how should global resources, how should inequities and injustices be addressed. I think those are the issues that bind us all when we make those decisions as African leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at the organizers to see if we can have one or two questions from the audience. Is there time for that?
Maybe.
Yes.
Thank you very much. The name once again is Kifenzo Mkari from the OR Tambo School of Leadership. I think that we'll continue to have conflicts for as long as the application of international law is not consistent, but also the double standards that come with it, where on the one hand you have international law applied as a corrective measure for countries of the North, but as a punitive measure for countries in the South. But equally, we will continue having these conflicts if we don't come up with proper accountability measures to ensure that we hold each other accountable with the right consequence measures. So my question is, how do we ensure the consistent application of international law? And how do we challenge the double standards that we're seeing, particularly from the North? And lastly, what kind of institutions do we need to develop in order to hold each other accountable on the commitments that we make? Thank you very much.
Who would like to take that question?
Well, I'll make a quick attempt and then leave it to my colleagues. I think you're right. The differential application of international law and all other corrective measures, it certainly says that we need a new architecture of global peace and security that is recognizes the diversity and it's inclusive and does not apportion or limit power to few and few powerful countries alone. We need to change that architecture for global peace and security at the global level, and that should also apply to the regional organizations. But certainly for us in Africa, apart from these other interventions to guarantee sustainable peace and stability, we also have to make some decisive interventions in dealing with unsustainable levels of poverty that characterize a number of our countries and therefore cause tensions and conflicts among ourselves. And also invoke new ways of dealing with these conflicts, including applying multi-stakeholder approaches involving the private sector and civil society. And in some of the conflicts we find could be civil societies causing them or instigating them, or the private sector of want for resources that end up causing conflicts on the continent. So a number of interventions that are very creative, very innovative, need to be put in place in dealing with the conflicts going forward.
The enactment and enforcement of international law has to start at the national level. It has to start with laws that are based on policies of protection and policies of justice. And if nationally they are respected and are implemented, then naturally you see it move. It also has to take place at regional levels. We have our regional parliamentarian groups. We have resolutions that are done by the African Union for the protection of women, protection against violence. And again, they have to be domesticated nationally and enforced if you wanted to. So an international law at the level of the global setting is primarily the International Criminal Court. And we know that not all the countries, the major countries, some countries like the United States and Israel have not agreed to become a member into the enforcement and the acceptance of the rules of the International Criminal Court. And so we have not been able to see the adherence of that. But you're absolutely right. The African Union, the other regional institutions are the ones to be able to ensure that rules that protect people, safety rules, are adhered to. And if not adhered to, there needs to be a criteria. That's where the Security Council comes in. The Security Council is right now not operating at a level where they can lead the action of ensuring international law is respected and implemented. Again, I think it's a matter of being able to react to these changing times and to change the institutions.
Let me just, sorry to come back to my country because I think genocide against Tutsi in 1994 was a shame for everybody. But when it comes to the international law, when everything was done, the shameful stuff was done, and a million people were killed, there was a same thing to say, well, how are you going to solve the problem? But among all this they have solved in Rwanda, and the international community was not there. They even left. But then the Rwandese get together and they build something called Agachacha. Agachacha is the seed. It's again getting back to the local grassroots and building what happened in history, many years of solving problems. But that was a shame because the people used to live together. And they went back to the culture of saying, if people, it's a kind of, they call it the 1,000 hills. People just go to do the agriculture, but at the end of the afternoon, they sit together, they start talking, the kids are playing around, and they say the only thing which can reconcile these people, it was the tribal, ethnic stuff, and which has been created, a long story of colonialism and the other stuff. But people are unique. They have the same language, same religion, same culture. There is a way to build on that. Agachacha was fighted by international law. People didn't want to ask, they said, what are you going to do? You're not going to solve your problem. But the Rwanda stand up and say, we're going to use Agachacha. And Agachacha today is the way of people on a local level sitting together, women, youth, elders, and speak about their problem. How can we live together? You killed my parents. I killed your sister. But we still have to live together. Of course, there's a lot of national reconciliation. There's a lot, maybe President Ellen can say that's a lot what has been done. But I think I go back to this international law versus the local laws and means of living together. Because at the end of the day, international community will come, they will leave, but people will stay together. How you build up this sustainable peace is exactly to the entities, and making sure the leadership is always a group entities, the local authorities, the national authority, the regional who are in mediation, continue to say never again. Never again is built up on this level, community level, and up. And of course, education is key, civil engagement, because if you are not leaving people like that, they will kill each other again. If you close the eyes and you don't pay attention to good governance, they will be killing each other again. So all together, as I said, the multidimensional approach is why you solve this justice, social justice. You build up also economic development within the entities to make sure that today, I will not come to kill you because we have a business together. We are building business together. We are more focusing on how we're going to build up our system, economic system, to make sure that our children are educated, and we have a health system, and we have all these basic things we are talking about. So I still believe that building this justice and the national reconciliation goes with all the focus again of development, justice, leadership goes with the local governance, national governance, regional governance, And we do those crises which remain today is because you hate, you cultivate the hate among population. Who's to kill who? Is again your neighbor. So we really need to pay attention to that one, and I think this is why I'm continuing to say, everybody who's here, who's thinking about innovative approach, the youth, the women, everybody, we need to continue to look at how do we solve the problem of crisis, small conflict, which can become tomorrow another big crisis. So I come back again to that. I think it's a multidimensional approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I understand that the time is up, but thank you very much for your contributions today.